And somebody asked the question, hey, if I have an idea, how do I determine if it's worth turning it into an art piece? And I wanted to respond really quickly. And while I was writing a response, I was realizing like, hey, that's actually kind of a big question. How do we evaluate ideas and decide on what to do? And then I told JK about this question, and he was so wonderful to join us as well to give his input. Great that you're here. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here again. It's been a while, but hey, everybody, good to see you.
Wonderful. All right. So I prepared some bullet points, but of course we can always stray off topic or talk about other points. I just figured it would be good to have some places to start. And of course, if there are any questions in the chat, and maybe also answers, like maybe you have a technique that is especially helpful to you, then we would love to hear more about that. So, which ideas are worth doing? As I said, most creative people do not have a shortage of ideas. That's maybe another topic. Like, you know, if you feel like you don't have good ideas, there are also ways out of that. But today we're going to focus on, okay, I have all these ideas. How do I decide which ones should we work on? Which ones should we create? And I think idea evaluation is a very important skill that we can use not only in art, but in general. For example, if we have personal art projects, if we think bigger, like if we're working at a company and they create feature films, they also need to evaluate which ideas they want to invest in. And but even if it's something as trivial as decorating your own house, you might have to debate which things you should actually do. And of course, outside of the creative field, that's also very important. If you just think about creating a new product as a company, you also need to figure out if that is worth doing. Do you have anything to add on this point, JK?
No, I think you really covered it. This is one of those things that I think we take for granted a little bit because either ideas are just so frequent and out there that I once heard a quote that said something like, ideas aren't cheap, they're free. Because like you said, they just kind of pop into existence and into our heads. So there's never a shortage of them. And if anybody is interested in that concept that you brought up earlier of where to come up with ideas or how to generate more, let us know in the comments or after, even if you're watching a replay. We'd love to do a video on that too. I think we both have a lot of good techniques for how to do that. And but now we're at that point where we have too many ideas. So,
for sure. I think we're also going to dip into that topic a little bit during this live stream. But focus for now is we have many ideas. How do we go about that? So why is it important to evaluate an idea and to decide on do I do this idea or do I do this idea in this way? The problem is that we have finite resources, being, first of all, the time that you have in life personally. There's not an infinite amount of it. And even if you have time, the question is if you have the energy. For example, if art and animation is not your day job and you are exhausted from your day job, then the energy that you have after your job is a really valuable resource. And if you do stuff with other people, it gets infinitely more complex because all of a sudden you manage other people's time in addition of your own time, and maybe their energy level and their motivation as well. Like, even if technically you pay somebody to work for you, they might not, or they for sure don't have the same energy every single day and in every phase of the project. And last but not least, there's also the problem that things cost money. If you're actually talking about an art piece and you need to buy raw material for it, good paper, good paint, for example, that can also be a question of just what you invest in. So the answer, if you should pursue an idea or not, I think leads very quickly to this famous, like, it depends. It depends on a bunch of things. But I do think there's a short answer and longer answer to things, as I felt when I wanted to reply to that person who asked the question. So I don't know. We didn't talk about it beforehand, but JK, if I would be someone, I come to you with my idea. Like I said, like, I have an idea for this painting, and I ask you, should I do it? What would your short answer be?
Absolutely. So my answer is going to be another question coming right back at you. And that question would be, what are your goals? For me, that's going to be one of the fundamental aspects. And I think that if I could add one more thing to your list of, why do we choose one project versus another? I think goals is another really good answer to that. Toss that down at the end of why does it matter? Because if you go after certain projects with a certain goal, it's much more likely to succeed versus something completely different. And I think that to know your own goals can be really, really valuable, especially when you're starting out, because you could set yourself up for success there, or you can pursue something that is not going to be in alignment with your goals. So that would be my quick answer. Well, how about you?
Yeah, awesome. I like that focus on goal. I guess my question, my answer would already be assuming a goal. Namely, I would say, if it brings you joy to work on this right now, to start working on this right now, you should do it. But of course, that does assume the goal. Like, if you want to do it for fun, and you have the time, then absolutely go for it. Because that's also, I feel like so often we can get hung up on all the reasons that speak for not doing something, or preparing better, or waiting for the right time, or stuff like that. And I feel like before we even dip into that, which we will, in a second, I would be like that. If you have this pull towards it, if you right now you feel motivated to do it, just start if you can. So yeah, that would be my short answer to this. But you're absolutely right. The long answer, the most important thing that I put there first is, what's the goal? Yeah, and I don't really have much to add there. So, I mean, I guess we could think about a little bit more about what are the possible goals that somebody could have. What do you
Absolutely.
think?
Yeah, I think that's a really wise thing to kind of go over, because there's so many. And one of the things that I think is very important in the beginning is to not judge your goals. You need to be honest in this part of the process, right? So like, let's just say that your goal is money, right? Sometimes as artists, we're like, oh, that's not a noble goal. But if that's your goal, you need to know about it, right? You need to know that that's your goal. And if you're honest with yourself, you don't have to tell anybody else if you're for some reason worried that that's your goal. But also, we all have bills to pay. So sometimes that has to be your goal. So money would be one of the goals. Joy, like you said, Ferdinand, is definitely high up on the list of art. I don't know. I'm sure that there are a lot of accountants who do accounting for the joy of it, but there are a lot more who do it because they have to. So art is one of those things that if you don't bring that joy to it, you're going to have kind of a miserable life, because it's very hard. I think everybody here watching knows art is very hard. So you want to know if that's your goal. Is your goal personal joy? Is your goal exterior joy? Like, are you trying to share something with someone else, either to make them happy or even make them feel a different kind of emotion? I once did a personal project for my mother that I wrote a book for her. It was very hard, but what motivated me throughout the project was that I knew I was going to give her this book and she was going to love it, and she did. And so it was worth doing, even though that book's probably never going to go anywhere after the fact. So all these would be some of the things that spring first to my mind. Is there anything that immediately comes to your mind, Ferdinand?
Wonderful. I really love that. Then how you phrased it, external joy. That's really cool. And I think an extension of that would be just spreading your message, quote unquote. Like if you feel like you have something to say, like you out of your personal experiences, there's something that you want to share with the world. I think that can also be a very good goal. Yeah, I think we have some very important ones covered here.
And if anybody else has others that spring to your mind, go ahead and leave it in the chat. We'll try and toss them in, or at least other people can see them there. There are a lot. I mean, it's almost like as many individuals as there could be that many goals. And you'll probably talk a little about hierarchy in the future too, Ferdinand, but I'll touch on that real quick. It's also important to note that you might not have one goal. You might have multiple goals, and that's okay too. You do want to, at least for yourself, try and think about the hierarchy there. What's your most important goal? It's the thing that if you didn't accomplish that thing, all the other goals would kind of feel empty. That's really good to know, that primary motivation, because then you can kind of focus your efforts towards that.
Yeah, for sure. I do like that idea of thinking about all possible goals that you could have, because let's be honest, like if we want to do art as a job, or we aim at part-time or full-time even, then even if we feel like that's something we would want to stay away from, we do at some point have to think about how can we make money with that. And ideally, we can do both. We can spread the message that we want to spread, or we can do the stuff that brings us joy. But if you never think about, like, how can I actually sell this, like put it on a mug, put it on a t-shirt, then it will be very hard to do that professionally for a living, which might not be the goal. So, that's also cool if you realize, like, hey, that's not my goal. But I think it's important to make the decision, because if you have that calling that you're like, I want to do art and animation professionally, but you never think about how it makes money, then you won't get closer to that. So yeah, I think sometimes it's good to write these things on a piece of paper so you have it in front of you.
I would absolutely agree with that. I would say, for sure, do a quick little journal thing, free write, just put it down on paper. There's a book, and in it talks about how, I think this is where it was, it's been a long time. It talks about how your goals can change over time. But if you have it written down, you'll always know where you started, and you'll always be able to go back and say, oh, this is what my focus was at this point in time. And that's good to know. You don't want to just steamroll the old goals, because sometimes, as many of you know, and Ferdinand, I know you know, as you go through a project and it drags on, that original motivation might fade, or you might forget your original intent. And so to be able to go back and see it in black and white and say, that's right, my plan for this was X, Y, and Z, having it written down is a really good suggestion.
Yeah, wonderful. So next up,
I think we lost you on audio again.
What? Hello.
Or I did. I don't know if everybody else did.
Hello. Does it work now? Hello. Hello.
Earlier we were having some difficulty, and my equipment was beeping, and so I just started clicking random buttons, and apparently that fixed it. So Ferdinand's on button clicking now, just to see if we can. There you go. Yep.
Hello.
You got it. So apparently making you big and then small fixes everything.
Yeah, so that's definitely an issue with the streaming service here. Good to know. All right. Okay, so next point. What's the investment? And investment, I think the thing that comes to mind immediately is like, money and do I have to buy materials and stuff like that. But one thing that I would say is also very important to think about is time and energy, to think about how much would that cost me in energy. For example, if my goal is I have so many stories to tell. I want to tell an epic feature film. Well, if you look at the investment side, you will see that that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of, ideally you would have a team of some sort. Maybe there are things that you can't cover. That's also important to think about. What else do you need to finish it? If you're not a musician and you don't feel inclined to learn how to create music, you need to get music from somewhere. Is free music enough? Open source music enough? Do I have to buy music? How much does it cost? How much does it cost to hire someone? So looking at that investment side, I think can really help you for these big projects. Of course, if it's about a painting, the investment might always be roughly the same, but it's also painting of one character close up and painting a landscape shot with an army does have different time investments. Yeah.
This is one of the areas that just on a personal level, I remember in the beginning when we first became friends, you were always very good at it. I was not, because you knew how long things would take. And you were like, well, this would be this and this and this. And I'm like, I don't know. I'll just do it until it's done. And it is true that you get better at it as you pay attention to how long things take, stuff like that, or even the financial end of things. But it's a really important thing to know, because this is part of the realistic element of doing art. Any project, really. You need to be realistic in the expectations and the investments. And then you can, you don't want it to crush your dreams, but you don't want to run into a place where you're like, oh, I had all these aspirations, but I went about it the wrong way. So having this in advance is usually a pretty good idea.
It can also change your art. Like if you think about, I want to do something that is feature film length, and that is really, you realize that's one of the goals that I don't want to stray from, because I want it to feel like an epic fantasy epos, and I need a certain time of build up and stuff like that. Then you can say okay, I want to do this longer film, but how can I make this happen as a single person? And there are ways to do it. You could have it be more like a storybook, you could get inspired by really good animatics. There are some really good animatic artists where you're like, hey, this already feels like the final film. How do they do that? What techniques do they use? You could work with cutouts that you just slide across the screen, and you don't do much individual animation work. You decide not to do lip sync, for example, which is a thing that a lot of YouTubers do at the moment. They animate post to post, but they don't put in lip sync in the end. So sometimes the investment side saying no can help you to find a creative solution for that.
Definitely.
All right. Okay, let's see. What did I write down? Yeah, is it realistic? Is basically, that's the combination of the investment and the goal, putting these two together. Yeah, and now we are dipping into the hey, I have an idea, but I'm not sure if it is the best idea yet. And I think we could do a whole other live stream about concept art and pre-production and stuff like this. But maybe we can use it as a jumping off point, the things that we just said about ideas on how to get into refinement. There's one system that I always teach my students. So if it's usually about student projects, so the university tells them, hey, you need to make a film about something, and it needs to have at least one fluid animated motion in there. And most people, I feel like what's relatively easy to find, like you can watch making offs of Hollywood movies. You can find out what these studios do in terms of like step by step. If you do a 3D movie, it has to have you have to do character design, then you have to model the character, then you have to rig the character, texture, shading. Like these things, I feel like you can find relatively easy in the internet. I feel like what is a little more sparse is your mental approach. What is the current phase of your project, and how do you handle it? And here's my suggestion: to always think in terms of exploration, experimentation, definition, and then in the end implementation. And ideally, you would never go back. When you finish exploration, you start experimenting, and when you're done experimenting, you go into definition and so on. That's not always realistic. Sometimes you have another idea and you try to put that in, but at the same time, this method is kind of trying to get the best idea out of you, and tries to minimize the risk that you will have a better idea later on. And the two most important phases for that are exploration and experimentation. Exploration, that's a phase where you don't have a good idea yet, where you just explore, okay, what could I do? Because sometimes, we have that problem too. Like if the university says you have to do a science fiction film, and you're like, oh, I don't know about science fiction. You would have to think about what would be sci-fi topics. What do I do? Maybe we put this aside for now. But yeah, exploration. Let's assume you already explored all of your options and you have a vague idea. You really want to do that fantasy thing, you want to have a dragon in there, and then you can go into experimentation, and this is where you already have explored a bunch of options, and now you put them together and you try like, oh, could they fit together like that? I don't like this yet. Could they work like this? I don't like this yet. Could the dragon appear here? And this way you experiment with different ways until you find something that you feel works. J.K., do you have anything to add so far?
I think spot on there. And I would say that in my experience, one of the biggest challenges that people have is not spending enough time in these first two phases. Because if you go back and look at the great masters of like the Renaissance and things, you'll see that their experimentation phase was ridiculous. Like they did painting after painting and drawing after drawing, trying to nail down one idea. The one that always comes to mind for me was I was reading a book and it had just pages of images of the early work of the author who did, or the artist who did the Scream. It's that painting of the person screaming on the bridge. It's so iconic to all of us. But if you go look at all of the things they did that they titled the Scream before they settled on that last one, just did an amazing amount of attempts. And so many times we get in our head, oh, it should be this way, and then we run off to the next two phases. So I would say that it's really, really valuable to spend a little more time in this experimentation phase, even if you don't end up using it or you use it for some future project. You don't know what it's going to look like. Anytime you're doing creative exploration, the more you can do, generally, the better. There'll come a point of diminishing returns, but in general, if you could do a lot more past that initial idea, you'll come up with stuff you were like, wow, where did that come from? And it's a lot better. So that would be my one addition, definitely, to make sure that everybody's doing their best to spend time in these two phases, because you're right there. You don't want to go back to them, even if you do sometimes, but they're really important.
Yeah, for sure. I can only stress that too. So I can also, like, from two sides, I can add from my experience. So first of all, I think if we have something big like a Pixar feature film, for example, and you talk to the people who work on these films, and a film like this usually takes 3 to 4 years. Usually, they work on these first three for the first 2 years, for the first 3 years, and then the last year is actually the animation phase. And I feel like we have a little bit of a wrong reaction when we hear like, oh, making this film took 4 years. Then we feel inclined to, oh, I better start animating because, Pixar needs 4 years to finish a film. And there's like this impulse. I see that with the students all the time, where they jump immediately into the animation software and start to model something, start to do something, start to animate something. These three phases you could do entirely on paper. These phases you could do just with a sketchbook and some colored pencils, and you don't even have to sit at the computer to do that. Just really want to stress that once again. Feature film. What was the other thing? I also feel like when I have a project that has a very tight schedule, like this is going away from passion projects. This is more in like a client wants an explainer video about insurances. Then I think it's very important to involve the clients in each of these steps and also make it clear to them, like, hey, we kind of shouldn't go back because that will cost time, that will cost you money. So what I usually do is after each of these phases, I have a meeting with my client. Like if that would be for an insurance company explainer video, I'd be like, okay, so look, we thought about how to visualize danger, and we came like, there's this bear. The bear is causing the car crashes, and that's what you're insuring against, and we would like to do something with this bear. And then they're like, yeah, okay, I like the bear, let's do something with that. And then experimentation would be, okay, we have one version where it's like a grizzly bear and it's a little more gritty and more realistic. Here we have a cute cuddly one. Here we have something with live action, and then a CG bear. And then they decide which route they want to do. And then definition is, okay, they want to go with the cute cuddly bear. This is how the story is exactly going to be. This is how it's going to look. Here's the style frames are super important in productions like these, where you're like, okay, this is a frame, a couple frames maybe, of how the final film will look. Is that okay for you? And only if they said okay to that, you're gonna set up the final workflow and you're gonna do the implementation. So maybe a couple more words for definition. So in experimentation, you will realize you find these things that just click together, where it's, I like to compare it to a puzzle, where you still have to find the puzzle pieces, and sometimes you have puzzle pieces that do not fit in there, but you still try to put them in there. But sometimes you have these moments where it like comes together and you're like, okay, this is how the character, it just feels good if they are this kind of character and they look like this. This feels just good if that is the antagonist or something like this. And with experimentation, you will get to this phase where you change less and less and less every time you think about the whole thing. And then at some point you define like, this is how it's going to be. This is my storyboard. This is my animatic. After you've already done a bunch of storyboards, a bunch of animatics, you reach the point where like, this is the final animatic. This is the final storyboard. This is what we're going to do. This is how the character looks. This is my model sheet now. And at the end of that phase, where you defined everything about your idea, you can, at this point, it's almost like a painting by numbers game. You have the model sheet, you have the storyboard that shows you exactly how it has to be put together. And then all you have to do is to make it, is to follow this blueprint, follow this plan that you made. That would be the ideal workflow, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's very efficient. It's always going to be possible to go outside of this sort of structure, right? And as artists, sometimes we will. It's just how much risk do we want to involve, right? Because the more we veer off of structure, the more we have that opportunity for some really great things, but then also some opportunity for total flops because we didn't go through it line by line. One thing that I would kind of bring us back around to for a second is that concept that we started with of, okay, we have all these different things. How do we decide? So within maybe experimentation, what would you say? I heard you say a lot, this feels really good and this feels really good. So why don't you talk for a minute maybe about how within the experimentation phase you pick an idea?
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting, because in a way it also shifts, like there is like this big idea, like, okay, I want to do this short film about this topic because I feel very passionate about this topic and I want this to exist and to inspire other people. Sometimes that helps you even for these little ideas, like the idea of when does this scene happen? When does the character meet the love interest? Or should that happen there? Should that happen before the movie and stuff like that? That is what you're experimenting with, like different ideas, or like the idea of having the dragon be a certain way rather than another way. Like, how do you evaluate this against the other? Interesting. And I said feeling because this is something that I do a lot, where like, oh, this just feels better. This just feels right. But it is important to verbalize these things sometimes and to find out why does it feel better. And there are, I think, a few practical things like story structure. You can always look at the hero's journey. You can always look at like there's some derivatives from the hero's journey. You could look at a 5-act structure or 3-act structure, especially when it comes about creating a story. So there are certain guardrails that you can follow to make your decision using something that is more objective. For example, I would have a character who happily immediately goes along. Like somebody comes in and says like, hey, you need to go on an adventure. And the character says like, yeah, okay, I go on an adventure. And then the moment you put this puzzle piece in and you look at the hero's journey, you're like, there's something called refusal of the call in the hero's journey. Maybe my character shouldn't be so willing to just start the adventure or something like that. So yeah, finding these patterns, this tried and tested patterns, can sometimes help you evaluate story ideas if that really fits in that moment. What I also like to think about is in terms of contrast, especially if you have the idea of adding another character, to really force yourself to look at what is the function of this character? Why does this character need to be there? Couldn't this function be fulfilled by one of the other characters? Yeah, those are two examples that come to my mind spontaneously. Do you have something that helps you make decisions?
Do I? Well, I would say that, kind of going along with what you were talking about, I don't know that, or at least in my experience, I don't think we talk enough about our intuition quite as much as maybe we should. As you grow as an artist, you develop an intuition that's so much easier than going to the formulaic. But if you don't know the formulaic at first, then you just set yourself off on like this very rugged path that could be a lot smoother for yourself if you learn some of these things like the hero's journey. I know when I started, I wasn't really interested in, I should follow this structure and blah, blah, blah. But the more I learned those structures, the more I saw, okay, these things already kind of follow that way. Maybe I just push them in that direction a little bit. Or, I kind of wanted to blow up the hero's journey on this project, so I'm going to completely avoid it and do something different. But knowing those things will really help. And then you a little bit trust your intuition, and you do go inside and say, how does this feel? Is this feel more like what my goal was? Or does this thing, and that'll really help too, I think, just to know that you have inside you something that's pushing you one way or another, and to kind of hone that a little bit while you're making these decisions, to just, I guess, a little bit go with your gut. And then as you go, you'll learn what works, what doesn't. But in the beginning, especially, don't second guess too much, because the more you do that, the more stumbling blocks you put in your own path. And especially early on, it's really useful to get things out and done, because you learn so much from doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe it could also be a good idea to go always one idea further up or further down. For example, if your big goal is, okay, I wanna educate about this topic, you can check your mini idea towards this goal. Like, if I have a character who really doesn't believe in that, does that help my topic to help my idea to educate about this topic? Yes, because the main character is then going against him and say like, hey, this is an important thing to know about, stuff like that. And I think you can always go further down, like, what is the goal of this scene? What is the goal of that single gesture that a character does in animation? So yeah, you can go these chains up and down. I think that might be good. Yeah,
and you want, obviously the ideal is having everything point in that direction that you're trying to point people, but also, like you said earlier, you have limited time and resources and energy, so don't freak out if you have to put in a gesture that doesn't point exactly to the overall goal. One of the phrases that runs through my head every day as I sit down to do my writing is Stephen King has a book called On Writing, which I highly recommend for everybody, even if you're not a writer. It's so much about the creative process. And he says that at the end, when he goes back to do his second draft or his rewrites, he asks himself, what's it all about, Stevie? And so that phrase, even though my name isn't Steve, goes through my head all the time. What's it all about, Stevie? Like, what is this? What's the purpose? Go back to that beginning. Go back to that goal. Does this serve that goal? If it does, great. If it doesn't, then maybe there's something we can change a little bit. And you still want to be honest about it, right? Like if you start out with this character who is a certain way, you don't want to dramatically change that character on the fly, really, because that would be kind of dishonest to that character. But at the same time, you can kind of nudge them. You know, part of our job as creatives is to nudge our creations a certain way, and knowing what it's all about, and asking yourself over and over, or even at certain intervals, right? Maybe between each of these stages, you say, "What's it all about?" It can really help you to refocus and get back on the right track.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I also wanted to add about, especially, actually every phase, is getting feedback can also help you make these decisions. And checking against the goal with feedback is also a good idea. Feedback, of course, also tremendously important. Huge topic. How do you get feedback without influencing the people that you want feedback from? And it can also be highly difficult, but it can help you to check towards the goal. Like if you show people your animatic scene and you ask them, did you understand what was going on? And they don't understand what was going on, then that could mean that there are some things that you need to revise. Or you ask them like, what happened here? Who won this conversation? What happened in this scene? And they don't give you the answer that you expect. Or they give, sometimes the cool thing about feedback is that sometimes they give you answers that you weren't even expecting, but where you go like, true, yeah, that is in there. Maybe I should strengthen that. Maybe I should bring that out more. So getting different people's perspectives, both amateurs who don't know anything about filmmaking, but also then, getting mentors, people who have experience, who've made projects on a scale that you haven't before, can really help. Yeah.
Definitely.
Then I just before this morning I googled like how do other people do it, like how do people evaluate ideas, and indeed there's a whole industry in business to evaluate business ideas. And one of the techniques is the SCAMPER technique, which is just short for a bunch of things. And I thought that was kind of interesting and maybe might really work for these times where you feel like something isn't working right, but you can't pinpoint it to what exactly it is. And so SCAMPER, the S stands for substitute. You take something and you put something other in place, and then you see what happens. How does that change things? Does it make it better or worse? Combine is sometimes really helpful, especially to get shorter stories, to like, hey, I have this thing and then this kind of similar thing. Maybe I can combine that into one. Very often with characters. Like if you feel like, okay, these two characters are too similar, sometimes you can combine them to be one. Adapt, I thought, was also interesting. Like if I change something here, how do I have adapt to it later on? And at this point I realized, hey, this can also work. This is also important to do for your production process. Like if you're building up a workflow and you're saying like, okay, I wanted to make a short film with 2 characters and all of a sudden I have 10. Then I might have to adapt my animation style to have it possible to have 10 characters on screen without me going crazy animating that. Modify, especially with how can I make this? I keep it, but I make it smaller, or I keep it, but I make it extremely important. How does the story feel then if this aspect is magnified? Put to another use, I think that was more of a product development thing, but I guess you can also do it with scenes. Like if that scene is meant to strengthen that character, how does it feel if it strengthens another? Or a decision I made about prop design or character design, what if I use that somewhere else? eliminate, taking something out, see how it feels when it's completely gone. And reverse was kind of interesting to, because on the one hand side, it meant actually reversing something. It meant actually like you put something in different order and see if that would, if that is a change that benefits you. This is especially valuable in longer stories or bigger art projects, where you have things that are maybe a little bit separate from each other and where there's no clear, well, this has to come first. But reverse was also meant with regards to your perspective. What if you think backwards instead of going like, okay, I have this character who has this call to action, who has to do something, and then you go through it chronologically. Instead of that, you go the other way around. Okay, so what if we want to achieve this? And then you think in the other direction. And I just thought that was kind of interesting, and that is like in the middle of this experimentation phase where this probably comes to some very, very good use.
Definitely.
All right. And this is the end of my slides. I feel like we touched on so many things, dipped our toes into so many areas, and discovered so many things, mentioned so many important things. Is there anything more that we need to talk about urgently?
I would say just to touch, and we did a little bit on the scope aspect. So if you're doing a painting, right, that you expect to give maybe 10 hours to, don't beat yourself up going through every single one of these steps like in thorough detail, because then you're going to spend more than 10 hours just on coming up with ideas. Whereas, as you said earlier, if you're doing a feature film, you're going to need to spend a long time on this stuff. So we've kind of given everybody a lot of information today. It's important that you tailor it to your project. So if your project is small, don't go crazy, knocking yourself out, making sure that every gesture is going towards your final goal. Have fun with it too. It should be a little bit of fun. It's art. But if you're doing something bigger, don't neglect this stuff, because you will run into problems 2 years from now. And 2 years from now, you will not be pleased with your past self that they skipped all of this stuff. So definitely something that you want to keep in mind is that scope. And again, it kind of goes back to goals. Like, what is my goal for this piece? Is it to hang in a museum one day, or is this going to be a stepping stone to something else? It's okay to have a lot of stepping stones. Like, don't beat yourself up that every project has to be your magnum opus. I did that a lot in my writing. I was like, oh, this is going to be it. This is going to be the piece that does it all for me. And that's just dumb. Like, treat every piece, like, do the best you can with every piece, but don't make it like a mountain on your shoulders, because you got to relax a little bit.
Yeah, it also reminds me of my time studying film, where like every new, like, it was just little scenes, but every scene that we would be doing as a project felt like this is the most important thing I've ever done in my life. And you stay up late and you work long hours, and it feels so monumentally important in that moment. But when is the last time I looked at one of my university projects? I haven't done that in a long time, and it wasn't my stepping stone to fame, which also is not its job. Like, if you make a scene at university, the job is that you learn things and experience things, and not that you do the best scene you've ever done. That's not going to be at university, probably. But that's also very important to keep in mind. And there was one other goal I feel like that we often have in animation that we kind of didn't really name so far, but one very legitimate goal for animators, especially younger animators, is to build things for your demo reel. and here you have a very particular audience. Like if you make shots especially just for your demo reel, like that's the motivation why you started, you really need to think about, okay, that studio or these studios where I'm going to apply for, what are they looking for? What are they trying to find in my work? And it's not always the healthiest kind of work just to tailor to someone else, to just tailor to the audience, tailor to the studios. You also need to find your own voice. But if it's really about like, hey, I want to get a job at Pixar or a job at Disney, then really thinking about what do animation supervisors look for, talk to recruiters, what are they looking for at the moment, talk to people try to get contact to people who are working there at the moment to see what is important, and then that can help you to get the most efficient, effective demo reel. Yeah.
That's a really good point. And one of the nice things about demo reel stuff is that you can dedicate kind of hard and fast to it. You can tailor it to that audience. Whereas if you try and do a feature film for a specific audience, that's probably not going to motivate you through a whole project.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. And I don't see any questions in the chat. If there's anything anyone wants to ask, feel free to do so. We're going to be here a couple more minutes. Yeah, I think I reached the end of everything that came to my mind more or less spontaneously. Yeah, maybe people can also let us know. I see there are not that many people in the chat. I get it. It's Friday. It's nice and sunny in most countries these days. So I can understand that you're hanging inside watching a live stream. But maybe also in the comments, tell us if you liked this format of us just talking about a topic. Yeah, JK, what do you think about it? I think it was quite a nice conversation.
Definitely. I think that it was a good length. It was very useful, in my opinion, to get all out on the table, because kind of like writing down ideas, to have it all presented one after another can be really useful instead of picking it in bits and pieces. And I would also say that if anybody watching has a specific question like this one, it can spark really cool conversations. So definitely swing by the Patreon page for Animator Island, chat over there, if not on YouTube. We're always interested in hearing your comments because they can really lead to some really interesting places for us too.
Exactly. Wonderful. Yeah, nobody jumped out in the chat to ask us a question. We will keep an eye on the comments. There will be next live streams. In fact, there will be a live stream next week. I also going to put that on Patreon and on animatorisland.com, so you don't miss these live streams. Thank you also very much for watching. Thank you so much, JK, for joining.
Thanks for having me, as usual.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Looking forward to next time. Bye-bye, everyone.
Have a good one.